Every Christmas, Grandma Ruth set one extra plate at the end of the dining room table. No one was allowed to move it. No one was allowed to use the chair in front of it. And no matter how crowded the house became, no matter how many cousins arrived with spouses, babies, casserole dishes, or boxes wrapped in shiny paper, that place remained untouched. The plate was always Grandma's best china, white with a thin gold rim. The glass beside it was crystal. The napkin was folded more carefully than any of the others. Beside the fork, she placed a small sprig of rosemary tied with red thread. When I was a child, I thought it was for Santa. My older brother, Luke, told me it was for a ghost. My mother told both of us not to ask. And Grandma Ruth, whenever someone finally did ask, only smiled and said, "It is for someone who might still come home." That answer followed our family for 27 Christmases. Then, on the Christmas Eve after Grandma turned 82, someone came through the snow, walked into our house, and sat in that chair. His name was David. And before the night was over, we learned that the empty plate had never been about death. It had been about a promise, a mistake, and a secret that had quietly shaped every person sitting around Grandma's table. That Christmas began like all the others. By noon, Grandma Ruth's old white farmhouse outside Cedar Hollow, Pennsylvania, was glowing with strings of warm yellow lights. Snow covered the stone wall along the road, and smoke rose from the chimney in a straight gray ribbon. The kitchen windows had fogged from the heat of the ovens. The whole house smelled like cinnamon, roasted onions, pine needles, and the orange peels Grandma simmered with cloves on the stove. Our family arrived in waves. My mother, Elaine, came first, carrying 2 pies and complaining that the roads had not been salted properly. My uncle Frank arrived with his wife, Marlene, and their grown daughter, Kelly. Luke brought his wife, Stephanie, and their 6-year-old twins, who immediately disappeared upstairs to look for the wooden train set Grandma kept in the hall closet. I arrived last with my 12-year-old daughter, Sophie, after a 3-hour drive that should have taken 90 minutes. I was 38 that Christmas, recently divorced, tired in a way that sleep did not fix, and determined to make the holiday feel normal for Sophie. Grandma opened the front door before I could knock. "There are my girls," she said. She wore a green cardigan with tiny pearl buttons and the silver locket she had worn for as long as I could remember. Her hair was completely white now, cut short around her face. She looked smaller than she had the year before, but her eyes were just as sharp. Sophie wrapped her arms around her. Grandma kissed her forehead, then looked at me for a long moment. "You look hungry." "I had lunch." "That isn't what I meant." That was Grandma. She could make a simple sentence feel like she had opened a locked drawer inside your chest. I laughed because I did not want to cry. Inside, the house was loud and warm. Someone had turned on an old Christmas record in the living room. Children ran through the hallway. My uncle was arguing with Luke about football. Mom was telling Marlene that store-bought whipped cream was not real whipped cream. It felt familiar enough to be comforting. Then I walked into the dining room. The long walnut table was already set, 14 places, and one extra. At the far end, gold-rimmed plate, crystal glass, folded napkin, rosemary tied with red thread, the empty chair. I had seen it every Christmas of my life, but that year something about it made me stop. Maybe it was because Grandma was 82. Maybe it was because my own marriage had ended and I had learned how quickly a person could become absent from a place they once belonged. Or maybe it was because, for the first time, there was something else on the plate, an envelope. It was cream-colored, thick, and old-fashioned. On the front, written in Grandma's careful handwriting, was one word: David. Looked toward the kitchen. Grandma was standing at the counter, slicing apples. "Grandma?" She did not look up. "Yes." "Who's David?" The knife stopped, only for a second, then she continued slicing. Behind me, a chair scraped. My mother had entered the dining room. Her face changed when she saw the envelope. "Ruth," she said quietly. Grandma set down the knife. I looked from one woman to the other. "What is going on?" Mom walked to the table and reached for the envelope. Grandma's voice sharpened. "Do not touch it." Mom froze. The room seemed suddenly too quiet, though the laughter from the living room continued. "Mother," she said, "you promised?" "I promised I would not force anything." "You promised this was finished." "No," Grandma said. "You decided it was finished." I had never heard them speak to each other that way. My mother was 61, a retired elementary school principal who could silence a cafeteria with one look. But standing beside that extra plate, she looked like a teenager being confronted with something she had hoped her mother had forgotten. I stepped closer. "Who is David?" Grandma looked at me. Before she could answer, Uncle Frank appeared in the doorway. He had heard enough. His eyes went straight to the envelope. "Oh, for God's sake," he muttered. Mom turned on him. "You knew?" Frank rubbed both hands over his face. "I knew she was thinking about it." "Thinking about what?" Grandma came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. "Everyone will know tonight." Mom stared at her. "You contacted him." "I wrote to him." "You contacted him." "I wrote a letter." "And he answered?" Grandma's eyes moved to the empty chair. I don't know. That answer frightened me more than anything else. For the next several hours, the house continued pretending to be Christmas. We decorated cookies. We opened wine. The twins fought over a toy truck. Sophie helped Grandma arrange slices of orange around the turkey platter. Luke built a fire and complained that the chimney needed cleaning. Frank watched the weather through the front window, saying the snow was getting worse. But under everything was a tension no one could name. Mom barely spoke to Grandma. Frank drank more bourbon than usual. I kept looking at the envelope. And Grandma kept looking at the clock. At 5:30, she turned on the porch light. At 6, she asked Luke to shovel the walkway again. At 6:15, she changed the candle at the end of the table because she said the wick was burning unevenly. At 6:30, Mom cornered her in the kitchen. I was at the sink rinsing a bowl when I heard her whisper, "If he comes, I'm leaving." Grandma did not whisper back, "If he comes, you will stay. You don't get to order me around anymore." No. But I can ask you not to punish a man for being born. The bowl slipped in my hands. Mom looked at me, so did Grandma. No one said anything for several seconds, then Mom walked out. I dried my hands. Born? Grandma leaned against the counter, her shoulders dropped. For the first time that day, she looked old. After dinner, she said. No, please, not after dinner. I've been watching everyone act like there is a bomb under the table. A sad smile crossed her face. There is. Then tell me where it is. She looked toward the dining room. The extra plate? I waited. She drew a breath. Your grandfather had a son. I stared at her. Grandpa Henry had been dead for 14 years. I remembered his heavy laugh, his work boots by the back door, his habit of saving rubber bands around the gear shift of his truck. He had been stubborn, funny, occasionally gruff, and completely devoted to Grandma. At least that was what I had always believed. A son? I asked. Grandma nodded. Before Mom and Uncle Frank? Yes. With someone else? Grandma's expression changed. No, with me. For a moment I truly did not understand, then I did. You had another child? A boy. What happened? Grandma closed her eyes. His name was Samuel. The kitchen seemed to tilt. I pulled out a chair and sat. She sat across from me. I was 17, she said. Your grandfather was 19. We were not married. My father was a church deacon, and Henry's family had almost nothing. We thought love would be enough to solve every problem because young people are sometimes foolish enough to believe love is a plan. Her fingers folded together on the table. When my parents learned I was pregnant, my father said I had shamed the family. He sent me to stay with an aunt in Ohio. He told everyone I was helping her after surgery. I was there 5 months. Did Grandpa go with you? No, he tried. My father threatened him, told him if he came near me, he would have him arrested for taking advantage of a minor. Henry wrote letters. My father intercepted most of them. My throat tightened. And the baby? He was born on Christmas morning. Outside, wind pressed snow against the windows. Grandma looked toward the dining room. I held him for less than an hour. I did not speak. They told me there was a family who could give him a stable home, married people, good people. People who had money and a proper house and no scandal attached to their name. My father had already arranged everything. You agreed? Grandma's eyes filled with tears, but none fell. I was 17. I had been told for months that keeping him would ruin Henry's life, ruin my parents' lives, ruin the child's life, ruin my own life. I was exhausted, terrified, and alone. I signed. The word sat between us like a stone. Did Grandpa know? Not until after it was done. What did he do? He came to Ohio. He nearly broke my aunt's front door. He wanted us to find the baby, take him back, run away. But the adoption was legal, sealed, and already moving forward. We had no money, no lawyer, no help. She looked at her hands. Henry never forgave my father. Did he forgive you? She looked up sharply. He never blamed me. Something in her voice broke then. He blamed himself. I reached across the table and took her hand. Why didn't anyone tell us? Because that was what people did then. They buried things. They called silence dignity. And the extra plate? Grandma swallowed. Samuel was born on Christmas. The first Christmas after Henry and I married, your grandfather set a third plate on the table. Grandpa did? She smiled through her tears. He said, we don't know where our boy is, but we know what day he came into this world. If he ever finds the road back, he should know there was always a place for him. I covered my mouth. Every Christmas of my childhood rearranged itself in my memory. Grandpa straightening the extra chair. Grandma polishing the unused glass. My mother refusing to answer questions. Uncle Frank making jokes whenever the subject came up. All those years, the plate had not been superstition or tradition. It had been grief. What happened to Samuel? We searched after the law changed. At first there was no information. Then we learned his adoptive parents had renamed him Jonathan Mercer. Did you find him? Yes, my heart lifted. Then I saw her face. When? 29 years ago. And he wanted nothing to do with us. The words were soft. He was angry. He had a right to be. Did you meet? Once. She pulled the silver locket from beneath her cardigan. Inside was a tiny black and white photograph I had never seen before, a newborn wrapped in a hospital blanket. Samuel had a good childhood, she said. His parents loved him. He grew up in Maryland. He became a mechanic, married a woman named Patricia. When we found him, he was 42. I did the math. He'd be 71 now. Yes, so David, Grandma nodded. David is his son, my breath caught. Samuel had children? One son, David. Where is Samuel now? Grandma closed the locket. He died 3 years ago. I looked toward the empty plate. Suddenly it seemed unbearable. Did you know? Not until last spring. How? David wrote to me. That was not what I expected. He contacted you? He found letters among Samuel's things after Patricia died. Letters from me, letters from Henry, letters we had sent for years even after Samuel stopped answering. So Samuel kept them. Yes. Did David know about us? Not really. Samuel told him only that he was adopted and had once met his biological parents. He never said much more. Then, why is everyone upset? Grandma looked toward the hallway. Your mother met Samuel too? Before I could ask what that meant, Mom appeared in the doorway. Her arms were folded, her eyes were red. Tell the whole thing, she said. Grandma closed her eyes. Mom walked in. I was 16 when they found him, she said. Frank was 14. Dad wanted Samuel to know us. He thought if Samuel saw that we weren't trying to replace his family, maybe he would let us be part of his life. I could hear bitterness underneath every word. We drove to Maryland. We stayed in a motel. I remember Mom crying the whole night before we met him. Grandma whispered, Elaine? No, she asked, let her hear it. Mom looked at me. Samuel met us in a diner. He looked like Dad, same eyes, same hands. I hated him for that immediately. Mom, I was 16. She shook her head. You have to understand, all my childhood that empty plate sat at Christmas. Dad would get quiet on December 25th. Mom would disappear into the bathroom and come back with red eyes. We knew there was someone missing, but we didn't know who. When they finally told us, I felt like our family had been a second version, a replacement. Grandma's face crumpled. We never meant you to feel that. But I did. Mom turned back to me. At the diner, Samuel barely looked at us. Dad tried to talk. Mom gave him that baby picture. Samuel pushed it back across the table. What did he say? Mom's voice grew smaller. He said he already had parents. No one moved. He said he was sorry for what happened to them, but he didn't want a relationship. He said he had spent his whole life knowing someone had given him away, and meeting us did not magically make that pain disappear. Grandma whispered, he was right. Mom looked at her. He asked why we were there. Dad said because we were family. She paused. And I said, no, we're not. Grandma lowered her head. Mom's eyes filled. I told him he was hurting my parents. I told him he had no right to show up after 40 years and make them feel guilty. I said if he didn't want us, he should leave us alone. You were 16, I said. He looked right at me and said, that's exactly what I'm trying to do. She wiped her cheek. We drove home. Dad never talked about the meeting again, but the extra plate stayed. And you blame yourself? Mom laughed once without humor. I blamed him, then I blamed them. Then I got older and had children and realized none of it was simple enough to blame one person. I looked at Grandma. Did you ever see Samuel again? No. Did Grandpa? No. Grandma's voice trembled. He died still hoping. The clock over the stove ticked. At 7:15 we sat down to dinner. No one wanted to, but Grandma insisted. The snow had become heavy enough that the road disappeared beneath white. The porch light shone into a moving curtain of flakes. Weather alerts buzzed on our phones. Luke said anyone who planned to drive home that night should reconsider. We gathered around the long table. 15 chairs, 14 occupied. One empty. Grandma sat at one end, Uncle Frank at the other. Mom sat rigidly beside me. Sophie, unaware of most of what had been said, kept glancing at the envelope labeled David. Grandma asked everyone to hold hands. Even the children knew something was different. She bowed her head. Thank you for this food, she said. Thank you for the people in this room. Thank you for the ones who came before us, the ones we lost, the ones we hurt, the ones who hurt us, and the ones we never learned how to love correctly. Mom's hand tightened around mine. Grandma continued. And if there is anyone tonight who is looking for a place to belong, let them find a light on somewhere. She said amen. No one reached for food. Then headlights appeared through the front window. Every face turned. A vehicle slowed on the road, stopped. For several seconds, the only sound was the wind. Grandma stood so quickly her chair nearly fell backward. Mom whispered, no. Uncle Frank looked down at his plate. Luke asked, are we expecting someone? Grandma walked toward the hallway. I followed. Through the frosted glass in the front door, we could see a dark figure moving up the shoveled path. He was carrying a small duffel bag. The doorbell rang. Grandma stopped with her hand on the knob. She was shaking. I put my hand over hers. She looked at me. For a moment, she was not my 82-year-old grandmother. She was 17. Then she opened the door. A man stood on the porch. He was perhaps 45, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark wool coat dusted with snow. His hair was brown with gray at the temples. He held a knitted cap in one hand, and he had my grandfather's eyes. I had seen them in old photographs 1,000 times. The man looked at Grandma. Neither spoke. Finally he said, "Ruth?" She nodded, his face tight. "I'm David Mercer." Grandma made a sound that was half laugh and half sob. "Come in." David stepped inside. Snow melted from his boots onto the mat. Everyone had gathered in the hallway behind us. He looked at the faces one by one. Mom stood in the back. When his eyes found her, he knew. "You're Elaine." Mom's chin lifted. "Yes," he nodded slowly. "My dad remembered you." The words landed hard. Mom's face drained of color. Grandma touched David's sleeve. "You must be freezing." "I'm okay." "You drove in this?" "I almost turned back 3 times. Grandma looked at him. "I'm glad you didn't," he smiled faintly. "I'm not sure yet." For some reason, that made Grandma laugh, a real laugh, and after a second David did too. Tension loosened by one thread. Grandma took his coat. I noticed his hands. Large, square fingers, grease embedded near the nails despite careful scrubbing, mechanic's hands, just like Grandpa's, just like the story Grandma had told. Luke stepped forward first. "I'm Luke." They shook hands. I introduced myself, then Sophie. The others followed in a confused parade of names and relationships. Finally, Mom approached. She and David stood several feet apart. "I'm sorry about your father," she said. "Thank you, I didn't know he had died." "I know," her eyes flickered. "Did he really remember me?" David looked at her for a long moment. "Yes." Mom waited for more. He did not give it. Grandma touched his arm again. "You came at dinner, that's good, you should eat." David looked toward the dining room, then he saw the extra plate. He stopped. Everyone stopped. His eyes moved from the china to the crystal glass, the rosemary, the envelope. He walked toward it. "Is that?" Grandma nodded. "For you?" He did not sit. He stared at the chair. "My father told me about this." Grandma's breath caught. "What?" "He said you kept a place for him every Christmas." Tears filled her eyes. He knew. Not when he was young, later. "How?" David pulled a folded piece of paper from his coat pocket. "Because Henry told him." Grandma gripped the back of a chair. "Henry?" David nodded. "Your husband came to see my father." Mom stood. "When?" "About 18 years ago." The room erupted at once. Grandma said no. Mom said Dad never. Uncle Frank swore under his breath. David raised one hand. "I think maybe I should explain." Grandma lowered herself into a chair. David remained standing. "My father owned a small repair shop outside Frederick. One afternoon, an older man came in with a pickup making a terrible noise. Dad took one look under the hood and told him the alternator was dying." A sad smile touched David's face. The man said, "I know. I drove all the way here hoping it would." Grandma covered her mouth. "Henry." Dad recognized him. "How?" "Same way I recognized Elaine from the diner. He never forgot your faces." David unfolded the paper. Henry asked him for 10 minutes. The room had gone completely silent. My father told him he didn't want to reopen anything. Henry said he understood. Then he said, "I didn't come to ask you to call me Dad. You already had a father. I came because I am getting older and I need to know I told you one thing before I die." Grandma began to cry. David looked down at the paper. "This is what my father wrote afterward. He kept notes about everything. He said Henry told him, you were wanted, not conveniently, not wisely, not in a way that could protect you, but you were wanted every day of your life." No one breathed. Dad wrote that Henry told him about the Christmas plate. He said the plate was never meant to make him guilty. It was a way for 2 young parents to remind themselves that losing a child did not mean pretending the child had never existed. Grandma's shoulders shook. "Why didn't Henry tell me?" David folded the paper. "Maybe because my father asked him not to." That hurt her. I could see it, but she nodded. "What happened after they talked?" "They drank coffee in the shop. For 10 minutes, 3 hours. A tiny sound escaped Grandma. "Your grandfather went back twice," David said. Mom looked stunned. "Dad was seeing him? Not often, maybe once a year, sometimes less." "And Samuel let him?" David nodded. "Eventually." Grandma leaned forward. Did Samuel ever ask about me?" David's face softened. "Yes." That one word seemed to take all the strength from her. "He asked how you were." Henry showed him pictures. "He knew about the family. He knew all of our names." David looked toward me. "He knew about Elaine and Frank. Later he knew about Luke and Anna." My eyes filled. "He knew me?" "He had a picture of you graduating college." I covered my mouth. Grandma whispered, "Henry." Uncle Frank stood abruptly and walked to the window. His hands were on his hips. "Why would Dad keep this from us?" David answered gently. "Because my father wanted control over one part of his story." Frank stared out at the snow. "He didn't want a reunion," David continued. "He didn't want holidays together. He didn't want to call Ruth his mother or Henry his father, but he wanted to know them as people." Mom sat down. "He hated us." "No," David said. She looked up. "He didn't hate you." "You weren't in that diner?" "No, but I lived with him for 43 years. Her face tightened. David pulled out the empty chair beside the extra plate, but he still did not sit in it. "My dad was complicated. He could fix anything with an engine, but he could go 6 months without returning a phone call. He loved my mother more than anybody I've ever seen, and he still sometimes slept on the couch because they were both too stubborn to apologize. A few people smiled. He had a good life, David said. A real life. He loved his parents. He never wanted his relationship with them questioned. When Henry showed up, Dad thought accepting him would somehow betray the people who raised him. Grandma nodded through tears. I understand, but over time he realized knowing where you came from does not erase where you grew up. David looked at Mom, and he understood something about you too. She swallowed. What? He understood that you were a kid. Mom's eyes closed. He told me about what you said in the diner. I think he repeated those words to himself for years because they gave him an excuse not to come back. I'm sorry. I know. No, you don't. Mom stood. Her voice shook. I have remembered that day for 29 years. I was jealous of a man who had lost his parents before he could even remember them. I treated him like he was trying to steal something from me when all he was doing was refusing to pretend. David watched her. Mom continued. I am sorry I said we weren't family. He looked toward the extra plate, then back at her. He believed you. Her face broke. I know. David's voice became softer, but he also eventually believed Henry. Grandma reached for the envelope on the plate. I wrote you a letter, she said. David looked at it. I figured. I didn't know if you would come. I didn't either. You don't have to read it now. He took the envelope. What does it say? That depends on whether you read it before or after dinner. He almost smiled. Then I should probably eat first. Everyone laughed. It was not a large laugh, but it was enough. Grandma touched the back of the extra chair. Sit. David looked at it. He hesitated. Then he sat in the place that had waited for someone longer than I had been alive. No one moved for a moment. Grandma sat opposite him. She looked at the plate, then at David. Her eyes closed briefly. When she opened them, she said, All right, somebody pass that man the potatoes before I start crying again. Dinner began. At first, conversation was awkward. Everyone spoke too carefully. Luke asked David about his drive. Kelly asked where he lived. Frank asked about the repair shop. David answered politely. He lived in Virginia now. He worked as a building inspector. He had been married once, divorced 7 years, no children. He still helped manage the old garage his father had owned because he could not bring himself to sell it. Sophie, who had been listening with the fearless curiosity of a 12-year-old, finally asked the question the adults were avoiding. So what are you to us? Every adult at the table froze. David looked at her. What's your name again? Sophie. Well, Sophie, technically your grandmother Elaine is my aunt. Sophie looked at Mom. Grandma has a nephew? Yes, David said. So my mom and you are cousins? That sounds right. She nodded thoughtfully. Then your family. David glanced around the table. It appears I've been outvoted. Sophie returned to her mashed potatoes. The tension broke. Later, over pie, David told us more about Samuel. He loved old country music but could not carry a tune. He hated mayonnaise. He cried at animal rescue commercials. He once drove 12 hours to help David after his car broke down, then complained the entire way home that David should have checked the coolant. Grandma laughed at every story. Sometimes she closed her eyes as if trying to imagine the life she had missed. Then David said something that changed the room again. My father came here once. Grandma stopped smiling. What? Not inside. When? About 9 years ago. David turned the coffee cup slowly between his hands. My mother was sick, cancer. Dad was falling apart. He had reached the age where losing people made him think about everyone he had kept at a distance. Grandma listened without moving. He drove here on Christmas Eve. Mom whispered, no. He parked across the road. Grandma's hand flew to her chest. Henry was alive then, she said. Yes, why didn't he come in? He saw the lights, the cars, people through the windows. He said he could see the table. The extra chair sat beneath David. He saw the plate? Yes. Grandma bowed her head. He watched for almost an hour. Why didn't he knock? David's eyes filled for the first time that evening. He was scared. Grandma looked up. Of me? Of wanting you. The sentence was so simple that it hurt. David stared down at his hands. He told me he had spent his entire life building a wall around the fact that he was adopted. He loved his parents. He had a wife, a son, work, friends. He had made a good life. That night he sat across the road and saw a chair waiting for him, and he suddenly felt 17 and 70 at the same time. Grandma was crying openly. He said if he walked through the door and you embraced him, he didn't know what it would mean, and if you didn't, she reached for a napkin. I would have. I know. He should have come in. I know. I would have held him. I know. Her voice broke. I would have told him I was sorry. David leaned forward. He knew. Grandma looked at him. I don't know if that helps. It does not fix it. No, but it helps. For a long time, they simply looked at each other. I realized then that sometimes the closest thing we get to forgiveness is information arriving too late. After dinner, the snow grew worse. The county issued a travel warning. The power flickered twice. Frank carried an extra firewood. We moved to the living room, where the Christmas tree lights reflected in the windows and the fire snapped loudly in the stone fireplace. Grandma and David sat on the sofa. The rest of us formed a loose circle around them. She finally said, "Open the letter." David looked at the envelope he had carried from the table. "You sure?" "No, but do it anyway," he smiled. Then he slid one finger beneath the flap. Inside were 4 sheets of paper. He began reading silently. At first his expression did not change, then he stopped. He looked at Grandma. "What?" she asked. He lowered the pages. "You wrote this to my father." "Yes." "Not me." "No." The room was quiet. "Why give it to me?" "Because I wrote it when I learned he had died." David looked back at the pages. Grandma folded her hands. "I did not send it because there was nowhere to send it. Then when you wrote to me, I thought maybe it belonged with you." David began again. After a minute, his eyes filled. He cleared his throat. "Can I read part of it out loud?" Grandma nodded. He read, "Samuel, I have spent most of my life wondering what sentence could explain everything. I have learned there is none. I cannot say I gave you away because I loved you, because love does not make the loss less painful. I cannot say I had no choice because I signed my name. I cannot say I chose freely because I was 17, afraid, and controlled by people more powerful than I was. The truth lives somewhere between guilt and helplessness." Grandma stared at the fire. David continued, "I want you to know that I never needed you to call me mother. I never needed you to replace anyone. I wanted one thing I was too frightened to ask when we met. I wanted to know whether you had been loved." David stopped. His voice failed. He pressed the paper to his lips. Grandma whispered, "Your father told me he had good parents, but I wanted to hear it from him." David nodded. "He was loved." Grandma closed her eyes. "He was very loved." A tear slipped down her cheek. "Thank God," David continued. "If you had a mother who stayed beside your bed when you were sick, I am grateful to her. If you had a father who taught you to drive, I am grateful to him. If someone packed your school lunches, attended your games, scolded you when you were foolish, waited up when you came home late, and stood beside you when your heart was broken, I do not resent them. I owe them more than I can say." David looked around the room. "My grandparents did all of that." Grandma nodded. "Then I owe them everything." He read the final paragraph. "I am sorry the first act of my motherhood was signing you into someone else's arms. I am also grateful those arms were there. Both things can be true. If there is another life after this one, and if we meet there, I will not ask you to forgive me. I will only ask if I may sit near you for a while." No one spoke. Even the children had become still. David folded the letter. Then he did something none of us expected. He moved from the sofa to the floor in front of Grandma. Both her hands. "My dad would have hated this," he said. A laugh escaped her through tears. "What?" "All of us talking about feelings." Grandma laughed harder. "He got that from Henry." David smiled. "He did." Then his expression changed. "There's something else you should know." She looked at him. "The last week of his life, he was in hospice at home." Grandma's smile disappeared. "He had heart failure. We knew it was coming. One night he asked me to bring him a small metal box from the garage." David reached into his duffel bag, pulled out an old dented toolbox, dark green, the paint worn away around the edges. Grandma gasped. "That was Henry's." "Yes, how do you have that?" "Henry gave it to Dad the last time they saw each other." David opened the lid. Inside were letters, dozens, some tied with string, some yellowed, some in modern envelopes. Grandma reached toward them but did not touch. "My letters. And Henry's." She shook her head. "He kept them?" "All of them." David lifted a small object wrapped in cloth. Inside was a tiny wooden toy car. Grandma stared. "Henry made that. For my father? He carved it when I was pregnant." David placed it in her palm. Grandma held it like it might vanish. "My father kept it by his bed at the end." Her eyes squeezed shut. David continued. "The night before he died, he asked me if I knew what day he was born." "Christmas," Sophie whispered. David nodded. "He said, 'There's a plate somewhere that has been waiting too long.'" Grandma's breathing became uneven. "I asked him what he meant. He told me about this house, about the table, about Ruth and Henry." He looked at Grandma. Then he said, "I never sat there. Maybe someone should." Grandma covered her face. David squeezed her hands. "That is why I wrote to you." Mom turned away, crying. Frank stared into the fire. I held Sophie against me. David said, "I almost didn't send the letter. I thought maybe I was opening a wound that had finally closed." Grandma lowered her hands. "It never closed. I know that now." She touched his cheek. "You look like him, so everyone tells me." "No, not just your face. What else?" "Your hesitation." David laughed. Grandma smiled. "Samuel used to hesitate before he cried, even as a newborn. His little face would wrinkle like he was deciding whether the matter was serious enough." David's laugh vanished. "You remember that?" "I remember everything." He bowed his head, and Grandma placed one hand on his hair, not like a grandmother meeting a grandson. Not like a stranger asking for forgiveness, just like an old woman finally touching one small piece of a life she had carried in silence. The power went out at 9:20. The house fell dark except for the fire and the battery candles on the windowsills. The children cheered, the adults groaned. Luke found flashlights. Frank checked the breaker. It was not the breaker. Grandma lit real candles in the dining room. We all returned to the table because it was the warmest room near the kitchen stove. With no television, no phones connected to Wi-Fi, and nowhere to drive in the storm, we did something our family rarely did. We talked, not politely, not carefully. We talked about the things people usually avoid at holidays. Mom told us how she had spent years feeling that she was less important because her parents had loved a child before her. Grandma listened. Then she apologized, not for loving Samuel, for letting her grief become a mystery her children had to interpret alone. "I thought silence protected you," she said. Mom shook her head. "It made me imagine worse things." Frank admitted that after Grandpa died, he had searched the desk and found a receipt from a gas station in Maryland dated 2 years earlier. "I thought Dad had some secret medical appointment," he said, "or maybe a woman." Grandma laughed so suddenly she had to wipe her eyes. "Henry, a woman?" Frank shrugged. "He bought breath mints. He bought breath mints because he liked breath mints." David laughed, then Frank looked at him. "I wish I had known." David's smile faded. "I think my dad wished that too, eventually." "What was he like when he got older?" "Annoying," Frank grinned. "Good, then he was definitely related to us." David told stories. Samuel once rebuilt a 1967 Mustang from parts spread across 3 counties. He volunteered at a vocational school but refused to let anyone thank him publicly. He carried dog biscuits in his truck for animals he met on jobs. He once fired an employee for stealing, then quietly paid the employee's rent for 2 months because the man had children. "He had a temper," David said. "He could hold a grudge like it was a retirement account, but when someone needed him, he showed up." Grandma smiled. "Henry," Mom said, "exactly Henry." For the first time, Samuel was not a ghost at our table. He became a person, a stubborn man with grease on his hands, a husband, a father, a son of 2 families. Around 11, the twins fell asleep on blankets near the fire. Sophie stayed awake. She moved into the chair beside David and examined the letters from the green toolbox. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Apparently you're the only person in this family who can. Why didn't your dad just come here after Grandpa Henry met him?" Adults exchanged glances. David did not avoid the question. "Because people can get used to being hurt." Sophie frowned. "That doesn't make sense." "It doesn't," he thought for a moment. "If someone tells you a stove is hot, you stop touching it. Even after the stove cools down, sometimes your hand still remembers." She looked at the extra plate. "So he thought this family was hot?" David smiled. "Something like that." Grandma said, "And we were." Sophie looked at her. "You? Sometimes." "Grandma, you make cookies." Everyone laughed. Grandma reached across and squeezed her hand. "People who make cookies can still hurt each other." Sophie considered this carefully. Then she turned to David. "Are you staying tomorrow?" He looked at Grandma. "If I'm invited." Grandma leaned back in her chair. "That plate cost me 82 years of waiting." "You are not leaving before breakfast." He laughed. "All right." At midnight, the power returned. The lights blinked on. The tree in the living room glowed again. Luke raised his glass. "Christmas?" "Christmas," we answered. Grandma stood slowly. She went to the dining room cabinet and took out one more gold-rimmed plate. Mom watched her. "What are you doing?" Grandma carried it to the table. She placed it beside David's, then another, and another. "What is this?" Frank asked. Grandma looked around at us. "For tomorrow, we have enough plates." "I know." She opened the cabinet again. "Then why are you adding more?" Grandma set out 3 unused places. "Because I think I misunderstood the tradition." No one spoke. She touched the back of the chair that had waited for Samuel. "Henry and I set one place for the person we lost." Her hand moved to the new empty chairs. "But maybe an empty plate should not only be for the past." "What do you mean?" I asked. She looked at me. "It should be for anyone who needs a place." Something tightened in my chest. She knew about my divorce, the loneliness, the embarrassment of returning to family gatherings without the husband everyone expected beside me. She knew Mom had spent decades carrying guilt. She knew David had spent months wondering whether he was opening the door to relatives who might reject him. She knew that every family has missing people, and not all of them are dead. Some are estranged, some are ashamed, some are angry, some simply do not know the way back. Grandma said, "Tomorrow, if someone knocks, we make room." Frank smiled. "What if 10 people knock? Then you eat in the kitchen." We laughed. The next morning, Christmas Day, the world outside was buried under more than a foot of snow. The road had not been plowed. No one could leave. For the first time in years, all of us were trapped together on Christmas morning. And somehow it felt like a gift. David woke before most of us. I found him in the kitchen at 6:30, making coffee in the blue enamel pot Grandma used when the electric coffee maker seemed too modern for her mood. He handed me a mug. "You couldn't sleep either." "I have a 12-year-old. I haven't slept since 2014. He smiled. We stood by the window. Snow covered the fields behind the house, blue in the early morning light. After a while I said, "Can I ask you something personal?" "I've survived, Sophie. Go ahead." "Why did you really come?" He looked down into his coffee. "I told you. You told us why you wrote." He did not answer. I waited. Finally he said, "My father asked me to." Before he died, yes, he stared out the window, but I ignored him. For 3 years, almost. Why? He gave a small, embarrassed shrug. I was angry at him. That surprised me. For what? Dying, I nodded. He continued. My mother had already died, my marriage had ended, then Dad got sick. The last year of his life, everything revolved around hospitals, medication, paperwork, oxygen tanks. I was tired, he was angry, we said things. What things? The usual terrible things people say when they are scared and exhausted. He rubbed the rim of the mug. One night he told me I spent my life leaving people before they could leave me. I thought about my divorce. That sounds painful. It was accurate. He looked at me. I told him he had no right to lecture me about relationships when he had spent 40 years refusing to speak to half his own family. Ouch. Yeah. What did he say? Nothing. David's eyes reddened. The next morning he apologized. For what? For teaching me how to run away. We stood quietly. He told me about this plate again, David said. He said after he died I should come here at least once. And you said no? I said I wasn't interested in collecting relatives. That sounds like something Samuel would say. Exactly. He smiled sadly. After he died I found the letters, I read all of them, then I put them back in the box and tried to forget. What changed? Last Christmas. He looked toward the dining room. I ate alone. My chest tightened. My girlfriend and I had broken up. Friends invited me places, but I said no. I bought a frozen lasagna and watched a basketball game. Around 9 I remembered the plate. He laughed quietly. Not because I wanted family, at least that's what I told myself. I just kept imagining an empty chair in Pennsylvania. So you wrote, in March. Why wait until March? Pride takes time to get bored. I laughed, then he became serious. When Ruth answered, she didn't ask me for anything. She sent 4 pages about my father. Not about being his mother, just questions. What music did he like? Did he have friends? Was he happy? What was his favorite food? What did you tell her? That he hated meatloaf. From the doorway, Grandma's voice said, Henry hated meatloaf. We turned. She stood in her robe and slippers, smiling. David stared at her. Dad loved it. Grandma's hand went to her mouth. Then she laughed. Well, good. At least he got one thing from somebody else. By 9, the house was awake. Children opened gifts. Paper covered the living room floor. Grandma gave David a small package. He looked uncomfortable. You didn't need to get me anything. I bought it in October. You bought me a Christmas gift before I said I was coming? I have been setting you a plate for 27 years. Do not underestimate my optimism. He opened it. Inside was a pocket watch, not new, old silver, worn at the edges. David turned it over. On the back were initials. H.M. Henry Mercer? He asked. Grandma nodded. Your grandfather's father gave it to him when he turned 18. David looked at Mom and Frank. I can't take this. Frank said, Dad would want you to? Mom nodded. It belongs with you? David opened the watch. It still ticked. Inside the cover was a tiny inscription. Come home before dark. David read it twice. Grandma explained. Henry's father was not an affectionate man. That was his way of saying he cared. David's eyes filled. He closed the watch carefully. I don't know what to say. Grandma smiled. Say you'll wind it. He nodded. I'll wind it. Later, while the turkey heated, Mom asked David if she could speak with him alone. They went to the front porch. The sun was out, bright against the snow. I could see them through the window but could not hear. Mom talked for a long time. David mostly listened. Then Mom handed him something, a photograph. I recognized it. It had hung in her study for years. A picture of Grandpa Henry standing beside his old truck, smiling with one hand on the hood. David studied it. Mom pointed to the truck. Then to the man. They both laughed. After several minutes, David hugged her. Not a polite hug. A real one? Mom closed her eyes and held on. I looked away because some moments should not be watched too closely. At Christmas dinner that afternoon, Grandma did something that surprised us again. She removed Samuel's old extra plate. She carried it to the sink. Everyone stared. Mom said, What are you doing? Grandma washed it slowly, then dried it. I am putting it away. David looked uncertain. Because I sat there? No. She returned the plate to the cabinet. Because Samuel came home. David's face changed. Grandma touched his shoulder. Not the way I imagined, not when I wanted, but I know him now. She nodded toward the toolbox filled with letters. I know he was loved. I know he had a good wife. I know he raised a son who drives through a snowstorm even when he is afraid. David looked down. I know he saw the house. I know he knew about the plate. Her voice trembled. And I know Henry sat with him for coffee. She smiled. I do not need an empty plate to prove I remember him. For the first time in my life, Christmas dinner began without the old empty chair. But 3 new empty places remained. Sophie pointed at them. Those are for anybody, right? Grandma nodded. Anybody. The words had barely left her mouth when someone knocked on the front door. Every head turned. Frank said, You have got to be kidding. The twins screamed. Somebody came? Luke laughed. Grandma stood. See. We all crowded into the hallway again. This time, the person outside was not a stranger. It was Mr. Bell, Grandma's 76-year-old neighbor from half a mile down the road. He wore snow pants over pajamas and looked embarrassed. My furnace quit, he said, and my phone died. I saw your chimney. Grandma opened the door wide. You hungry? He smiled sheepishly. I could eat. Sophie ran to the dining room. Use one of the plates? Mr. Bell looked confused. Grandma laughed. It is a new tradition. He sat with us. Then, an hour later, a county snowplow driver stopped because his truck had overheated near the property. Grandma fed him too. By evening, one of the 3 extra plates remained unused. I sat across from it after everyone had moved to the living room. I thought about the house I had sold after my divorce. I thought about the apartment Sophie and I now shared. I thought about how much energy I had spent trying to prove I did not feel abandoned. Grandma came in carrying 2 cups of tea. She set one in front of me. You keep staring at that plate. I'm thinking, dangerous habit, I smiled. Then I said, did you ever regret marrying Grandpa? She sat, no, even after what happened? Especially after. That doesn't make sense. It will, she sipped her tea. When Samuel was taken, Henry and I could have turned our grief into a weapon. Sometimes we did. We argued about who should have fought harder, who should have run away, who should have stolen the car. Who should have told someone. What stopped you? Nothing at first. She looked at her hands. We were not the sweet love story everyone later believed. We were 2 hurt young people. Blamed the world, then ourselves, then each other. I had never heard this. One night, about 6 months after we married, Henry packed a bag. He was leaving. I told him to. What happened? He sat on the porch until morning. I smiled despite myself. Why? He said he was waiting for me to tell him whether I meant it. Did you? I sat beside him at sunrise and said, I don't know what I mean anymore. What did he say? He said, good, me neither. She laughed softly. We stayed. I looked at the last empty plate. My marriage didn't. No. I feel like I failed Sophie. Grandma's expression sharpened. Do not turn one ending into a verdict on your whole life. My throat tightened. Easy for you to say. You stayed married 62 years. Yes, to Henry, not to your husband. I looked at her. She continued. Some marriages survive because 2 people keep choosing each other. Some survive because people are afraid to leave. Some end because they should. Some end even when both people tried. She touched my wrist. You do not honor my marriage by punishing yourself for yours. Tears blurred my eyes. I hate that she has 2 houses. She has 1 mother. I hate that Christmas feels different. Christmas has always been different. We just repeat decorations so we can pretend otherwise. I laughed through tears. Grandma nodded toward the empty place. Maybe that one is for the version of you that thinks she cannot come home. That sentence broke me. I cried at my grandmother's Christmas table while people laughed in the next room and the snow outside turned gold beneath the porch light. Grandma sat with me until I stopped. No advice, no lecture, just her hand around mine. The day after Christmas, the roads cleared. One by one, cars pulled away from the farmhouse. Mr. Bell's furnace repairman arrived. The twins hugged Grandma. Frank loaded leftovers into coolers. Mom stood beside David near his SUV. Where are you going from here? She asked. Virginia. You could come back for New Year's. He smiled. That fast? I'm 61. I'm done wasting decades. David laughed. I'll think about it. Grandma came outside without a coat. Everyone yelled at her. She ignored us. David hugged her. She held him for a long time. When they separated, she put one hand on his cheek. You do not owe me another visit. His eyes narrowed. That sounds like a trick. It is not. You bought me a Christmas present in October. That was optimism, not manipulation. He smiled. She continued. You came because your father asked you to. You sat in the chair. You told me about him. That is more than I had any right to expect. David looked at her. What if I want to come back? Grandma's face softened. Then do not wait for Christmas. He nodded. I won't. He got into the SUV, then lowered the window. Ruth? Yes, I'm glad you kept the plate. Grandma smiled. So am I. He drove away. We watched until the vehicle disappeared beyond the curve in the road. 3 weeks later, Grandma received a package. Inside was a framed photograph. Samuel at 68 standing in front of his repair shop. His hair was gray. He wore a work shirt with his name stitched above the pocket. He was smiling. Behind him, on the wall of the shop, was a small wooden toy car on a shelf. The one Grandpa Henry had carved before Samuel was born. David had included a note. Ruth, Dad kept this photo in his desk. I thought you should have it. You asked whether he was happy. Most days, yes. Some days, no. Like everyone. But he was loved every day. David Grandma put the photograph on the mantel. Not hidden in a drawer, not tucked inside the silver locket, on the mantel, where everyone could see. That spring, David came back. No holiday, no snow. He arrived on a rainy Saturday in April with a toolbox and announced that Grandma's porch railing was unsafe. She told him it had been unsafe since 1998. He said that explained why it looked terrible. They argued like relatives within 10 minutes. By summer, he was visiting once a month. Mom drove to Virginia to see Samuel's old garage. She returned with a box of photographs and a red metal sign that had hung over his workbench. Frank and David discovered they both collected old radios. Luke invited him to a football game. Sophie started calling him Cousin David, even though he repeatedly explained that this was not exactly correct. She did not care. Family math is stupid, she said. No one argued. The following Christmas, Grandma Ruth set the table again. She was 83. Her hands shook more when she folded the napkins, so Sophie helped. The old gold-rimmed plate stayed in the cabinet. Samuel's photograph sat on the mantel beside Grandpa Henry's. David arrived before noon carrying a pie he claimed he had baked himself. No one believed him. Mom hugged him before he had removed his coat. Frank shouted from the living room that his fantasy football team needed help. The twins dragged him upstairs to see the train. And when we sat down for dinner, every family chair was full. But Grandma still set 3 extra places. Mr. Bell used one. A college student stranded by a canceled bus used another after Luke found her waiting at the gas station. The third remained empty. I asked Grandma whether that bothered her. She looked at the plate. No. Why not? An empty chair is not always sad. What is it then? Possibility. That became the new tradition. Every Christmas we set extra plates, not for one lost person. For anyone, neighbors, friends, new partners, old friends after divorces. A coworker whose parents lived overseas. A nurse who had to work late and stopped by afterward. One year, David brought a woman named Claire. The next year, they were engaged. Grandma immediately informed Claire that David was stubborn. Claire said she already knew. Another year, Mom brought a widow from her church who had spent 2 Christmases eating alone. Frank complained that the table was becoming a community center. Grandma told him to buy a bigger table, so he did. But the most important thing that changed was not the number of chairs. It was the way we talked. The family stopped treating the past like a room that had to remain locked. Mom told us when she was angry. Frank asked questions. David talked about Samuel without worrying that it would hurt Grandma. Grandma told stories about Henry that were not polished for grandchildren. Stories where he was impatient, jealous, afraid, ridiculous, kind. Human, the mystery had protected no one. The truth, even painful truth, gave us somewhere to stand. 2 years after David first came, Grandma had a small stroke. She recovered enough to return home, but walking became difficult. That Christmas, we all insisted dinner should be somewhere easier. Grandma refused. My house. Mom said, you can barely use the stairs. I do not eat Christmas dinner on the stairs. No one won arguments with Ruth Mercer, so we gathered at the farmhouse again. David arrived early. He carried Grandma from the living room to the dining room even though she protested the entire way. You are not light, he told her. I am 85. That is not a unit of weight. Put me down. Soon. She slapped his shoulder. He laughed. When everyone was seated, Grandma looked around the table. 20 people that year. Family had grown, changed, bent into new shapes. David sat 2 seats from her. The old place at the end was occupied by Mr. Bell, who had become a permanent Christmas guest. 3 extra plates waited near the kitchen. Grandma raised her glass. I have something to say. Frank muttered, here we go. She ignored him. When I was 17, I believed one decision could ruin a life forever. The room became quiet. For many years, I believed my mistake had made me unworthy of peace. David watched her. Then I believed if I waited long enough, perhaps the past would return in the shape I wanted. She smiled sadly. It did not. Her eyes moved to Samuel's photograph on the mantel. My son never sat at this table. David lowered his head, but he knew the table was here. Grandma looked at all of us. Sometimes love arrives too late to change what happened. It can still change what happens next. She lifted her glass. To the next thing. We lifted ours. To the next thing. Grandma lived 18 more months. She died in July in her own bed with Mom and Frank beside her. David had visited 2 days earlier. Before he left, she gave him the green toolbox of letters. He tried to refuse. She said, I have spent enough years keeping things. Your turn? At her funeral, the church was full. People we did not know came forward and told stories. A woman said Grandma had paid her heating bill one winter. A man said she had sat with his wife during chemotherapy. A young teacher said Grandma had mailed her a card every month during her first year away from home. Mr. Bell cried harder than any of us. David stood near the back at first. Mom took his hand and pulled him into the family row. No one said anything about it. There was nothing to explain. After the burial, we returned to the farmhouse. The dining room table was empty. No plates, no candles, no rosemary. For the first time, I understood that traditions do not live in objects. People carry them. That December, we faced a question. Who would host Christmas? Mom offered, Frank offered, I offered. Then David called. I have an idea. On Christmas Eve, we drove to Virginia. Samuel's old garage had been renovated, not into apartments, not into a store. David had converted part of it into a community workshop where high school students could learn basic auto repair and carpentry. In the back, where old parts shelves had once stood, he built a long dining room. A massive wooden table ran down the center. Above it hung the old red sign from Samuel's shop. On the wall were photographs. Samuel, Patricia, Henry, Ruth, all four not arranged as rivals, as parts of one history. When we arrived, the table was set. I counted 24 places for expected guests and 4 extra. Each extra plate was white with a thin gold rim. Each had a crystal glass. Each had a folded napkin. And beside every fork was a sprig of rosemary tied with red thread. Mom stopped in the doorway. Frank looked away. I felt Sophie's hand slip into mine. David stood at the far end. What do you think? Mom walked to one of the extra settings. Where did you get the plates? Ruth left them to me. Of course she did, David smiled. I found a note in the cabinet. He pulled a small card from his pocket. The handwriting was Grandma's. He read it. David, dishes are meant to be used, so are second chances. Mom laughed through tears. At 6, guests arrived. Some were family. Some were students from the workshop. Some were people from town who had nowhere else to go. At 7, every planned seat was filled. At 7:10, one extra place was used by a truck driver whose route had been delayed. At 7:30, another went to a teenage boy from the workshop after an argument with his father. At 8, the boy's father arrived looking for him. David invited him to sit too. By dessert, only one extra plate remained. Sophie, now 14, sat beside me. She whispered, "Do you think somebody else is coming?" I looked at the door. Maybe. No one came. The plate stayed empty, and it was beautiful. Not sad, not haunted, not accusing, it waited without demanding. That was the lesson Grandma had taken almost a lifetime to learn. A place can be kept without holding someone captive to it. A door can remain open without forcing anyone through. Love can say, "There is room for you," without saying, "You owe me your return." That Christmas became the shape of every Christmas that followed. Some years every extra place was filled. Some years one remained empty. No one treated an unused chair like a failure anymore. Grandma had taught us that making room was the point. You could not command a person to come home, and you could not repair decades by pretending they had never happened. You could only tell the truth, leave the door unlocked, and make sure there was somewhere to sit if courage finally brought someone to the porch. Years later, when the farmhouse was sold, I walked through the dining room one last time. The table was gone, but sunlight fell across the floor where the extra chair had stood. I could still see the gold-rimmed plate, the crystal glass, the folded white napkin, and the little sprig of rosemary tied with red thread. For most of my life, I had believed that place represented someone missing. I understood then that it had become something larger. First it meant Samuel, then grief, then hope, then David. Finally, it meant anyone who needed a way back. I thought about Samuel, loved by the parents who raised him and grieved by the parents who lost him. I thought about Henry driving to Maryland just to sit across from him with a cup of coffee. I thought about Mom, 16 years old and terrified that love was something that could be stolen. I thought about David eating Christmas dinner alone one year, remembering a plate in a house he had never entered. And I thought about Grandma standing at the door in the snow, her hand trembling on the knob, hearing a stranger say, "I'm David Mercer," and answering with the 2 words that changed all of us, "Come in." That is why I set extra plates at my own Christmas table now. The dishes are simpler and the glasses do not match. Sometimes I forget the rosemary, but the meaning is the same. One place is for whoever needs somewhere to go. Another is for whoever is still trying to find the courage. Sometimes friends use them, sometimes neighbors, sometimes people we barely know. Sometimes no one comes and the chairs remain empty without sadness, because hope is not certainty, hope is room. Every family has an extra plate somewhere, even if it is not made of china. It may be a phone number no one deletes, a birthday remembered in secret, a bedroom no one changes, an apology waiting to be spoken, or a name everyone avoids because saying it hurts too much. Sometimes the person connected to that empty place cannot return. Sometimes they will not. Sometimes they are waiting for a sign that the door is still open. If that day comes, I hope we remember Grandma Ruth. I hope we do not demand that people return as the versions of themselves we lost. People come home changed. They come home older, angrier, softer, scarred, uncertain, or late. They may not say the words we imagined. They may not fix the past. They may only stay for one meal, but sometimes healing begins with nothing more dramatic than a chair being pulled out, a plate waiting, a door opening, and someone deciding at last to sit down. Every Christmas, Grandma set an extra plate. For years, I thought the saddest thing was that no one sat there. I was wrong. The saddest thing was how long we believed the chair could belong to only one person. The beautiful thing was the Christmas, we finally understood that there could always be room for one more.